me bring it into focus a little bit. We're talking about 50 years in Vietnam. Now, if you even try to do research on Vietnam today, you can't find North Vietnam and South Vietnam because it's just Vietnam. It's a war that we fought that we didn't win. Why were we there? Why was I there? So my story tonight is a little bit about what was I doing there? Why did I join the Army? What on earth did I do over there? How did it affect me? What was it like coming home? And how did it affect the rest of my life? It didn't start in Vietnam, much like all of us. Our life starts when we're quite young. So when I was young, I dreamt that life would be bigger and better. I came from a relatively low-income environment and had a little difficulty getting any mentorship or understanding what life was all about, but I knew there was something out there. And I want to tell you, Vietnam was what inspired me to do more, to be more, and to become the person I became today. So let's talk a little bit about that. Why did I join the Army? You know, you heard some of the other folks talk a little bit about what it was like in the 60s, and I know that many of you were there. But in the 60s, women didn't have a lot of opportunity. I wanted to be an engineer. They said, not so fast. You could be a nurse, you can be a teacher, or you can be a secretary. So I thought for a while, and I was pretty obedient, sort of goes with being in the military. I said, okay, I'll be a nurse, because I always wanted to give back. So I became a nurse. And again, in the 60s, it was Walter Cronkite on television talking about the daily body count. It was impressive, especially to this naive young girl who wanted to do something. I said, that's my higher calling. That's my higher calling. One of my instructors gave a slideshow on her experience in Korea. There's her standing there in her wool fatigues in a tent, a 55-gallon drum where they had a fire to keep warm. What was I thinking? But I did it. Right after that, I went down to the Army nurse recruiter and I signed up. I swore to defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And every time I think about that, it gives me chills. Joining the Army saved my life, gave me purpose, but Vietnam is why I did it. So let's talk about what I did when I was there. I ended up at the 91st Evacuation Hospital in Chu Lai, just south of Da Nang, up in I Corps. It was hot. It was not at all what I expected. And of course, we didn't have the web, so you couldn't really research an awful lot about what it was. And I had very little background in, my geography was very poor. Didn't know what I was really getting myself into. But I knew those soldiers out there needed help. They needed nurses. I knew people were dying. And do you know that in Vietnam, we saved 70% of every one of those soldiers that got to medical facilities. 70% who were injured in Vietnam. That was unheard of in previous wars. So nurses were very important. Our motto was aid to the wounded. I was first assigned to the emergency and receiving area, and we hired some of the local population. This is us in front of the heliport at the hospital. So here's how it worked in the emergency department there. The phone would ring or the radio would go off, and we'd get a message that within 8 minutes, we would get X number of casualties. 5 gunshot wounds, 3 frag wounds, head injuries, abdominal injuries, missing limbs. And we had to mobilize. Now, the first time that happened when I was alone on the night shift, I was the only nurse on duty, and I had to send runners, which were my only corpsmen, over to wake up the doctors and the other nurses to come, and I could hear the chopper coming before anybody else was there. And that was very vivid in my memory. We had the emergency room set up so that the litters could come in, the IVs were already hanging, we had all the equipment and supplies ready to go. Called the blood bank, we got low titer O positive blood because that was the most common that would treat the most number of injuries. The helicopter would land, the litter bearers would run out, not the corpsmen and not the nurses. The picture that a lot of people have is that we ran out to the helicopter or ran to the field. We were in the hospital. The litter bearers ran, brought the patients to us. We were standing ready in the emergency room, even had the tape ready to go. We tore the tape and taped it to our uniforms so that we didn't have to waste any time. When we started, IVs that I swear were as big around as your little finger in those GIs whose blood vessels had failed because they were in shock. The emergency room came alive. We were very busy. I don't have a lot of shots of what it was like, but we were busy. We could get those guys triaged, rank ordered. I could shave somebody's head with a straight razor to get them ready for a craniotomy in less than 5 minutes. They'd be in the operating room within 10 minutes, and we saved a lot of lives. The hardest time for me was when I found out that the ones that we got through this process, and I'd go to see them in the recovery room or in the intensive care unit, and I found out they died. We learned a lot in Vietnam. We learned about shock lung, which is what your body does when it's in what's called irreversible shock and your lungs quit working. We learned how to treat that, but not in time to save a lot of the GIs that were injured. Now fast forward here, after Vietnam, I chose to move to the reserve. It was a difficult time. Continued my military training, managed a family, got married, had a couple kids. But then my medical background transitioned into biological warfare issues, and I became interested in preparing for the disasters that were looming, the asymmetric threats, and I began working in weapons of mass destruction. I retired in 2005, but I want to tell you what a great thing it is to pass the baton to the next generation. This is me with my daughter at her commissioning. She's deployed 3 times. So I have to say that oftentimes our challenges turn into opportunities. And Vietnam was that event that drove me to dream, to continue the dream, to learn, to do, and to become. And quickly, I'll tell you that today, my issue, based on the fact that I was in Vietnam for a war that a senior leader had decided was reasonable, that cost us so many lives. My focus is on senior leader decision-making. The governor, the mayor, the president, the congressman. How are we going to do that? Very quickly, wicked solutions. I want to tell you, beat the clock, save lives, restore order. That's my mantra. Wicked problems are those confounding problems that there's no right answer, no wrong answer, but everything you do has consequences that cause you more problems. It's the whack-a-mole thing. So if you look at 9/11, what happened? Did leadership drive us to a better outcome or a worse? And in Katrina, we still don't know how many people died in Katrina because we can't count the number of people whose lives were lost because a decision was made to send them somewhere where we could not help them. And then Ebola, one of the most recent issues I worked on from a policy perspective. So what I did was take our exercising programs and look at them as how we can make that into a game, a simulation where we train people through a metric to measure their performance on past performance and provide them with insights to learn so you can practice being the mayor, the governor, the president before you get into the job and do a better job. That's what I do. That's what I learned. And Vietnam was really what pushed me into doing that and seeing maybe failure, but learning and understanding what success looks like. I thank you.